Hey, I just want to share with you a little bit about my story and how I have experienced failure and where that has brought me. I can remember the day that I graduated high school. A bunch of family was in visiting because they wanted to come to my graduation. I had to get up early and be there early, so I was up and getting ready, and the only other person in the house that was awake at that time was my dad. And my dad and we were talking a little bit, and finally he looked at me and he said, "Boy." I always knew my dad was serious when he said boy. he just kind of looked at me and said, "Boy, I never thought I'd live to see this day." Well, that's encouraging. But he had reason to feel that way. There were times I just was not a good kid. I blame it on my birth. I was 10 months being born, and when I was born, they say that I was all swollen. My mom had a C-section, and C-sections were not as common back then, and there were some difficulties with it, and my head was very swollen, and my dad said there was about that much space between the top of my head and the bottom of my chin. And I was so ugly when I was born that my parents did not buy my baby pictures. Could you imagine that? It's true. You can ask her. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I set our house on fire. We had to move out. When I got older and got into school, I was never a good student. Maybe that's the reason he thought he would never live to see that day. I always struggled in my academics. I was a C student at best. I always enjoyed going to school. I was never one that wanted to stay home or anything like that. Matter of fact, I enjoyed the 6th grade so well. I took it twice. But I just never excelled academically. And so when I had decided that I was going to go on to college, people were kind of surprised because I never did well academically. People were surprised that I was even going to college. But the reason I went is because I felt a call on my life to go into ministry. And I feel like God, knowing how unintelligent I was, I needed that extra training to be prepared for what He had in store for me. So I went on to college. I went to Johnson Bible College, as it was called then. I was one of those people that squeezed a 4-year degree into 6 because I continued to struggle. Matter of fact, there was one point in my college career where the college sent me a letter asking me not to return because my grades were so poor. But through the grace of God and Johnson Bible College and the encouragement from my mother, I went back and kind of pled my case. They decided to let me back in as long as my grades would get better, and so I did that. The girl that I was dating at the time, who is now my wife, she helped me along those academics as well, and they continued to come up. I continued to stay, and eventually I graduated from college. Never did great, but I graduated. Went on into ministry. Eventually started my own ministry called Upside Down Ministries. I did that for 8 years. It was very successful. Later on, I started the ministry that I'm doing now called The Climb, where I do public speaking and one-on-one coaching. I am presently finishing up my master's degree in pastoral counseling and life coaching through Liberty University. But here's the interesting thing that's happened. When I flunked the 6th grade, it was told to me that I was the first person in my family to ever flunk a grade. And that was hard to swallow. When I graduated college in 1997, I was the first person in my family to ever graduate college. It doesn't make me better or smarter than anybody else. I just share that with you to show how my past did not determine my future. After I graduated college, I started listening to Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy, and Tony Robbins, and some of those guys, and it started out with me reading a book called Untapped Potential by Jack Lanham. No relation because he spells his name funny. But that book just kind of set me on a path of personal development. And it began a journey of helping me to see myself differently. You see, I never saw myself as anything more than a C student at best. And so I never performed beyond that. But once I began to see myself differently, I began to perform differently. Since graduating college, I've taken additional undergrad classes. I have taken classes for my life coach certification, over 100 hours of that. And I am almost finished with my master's degree in life coaching through Liberty University. Here's the interesting thing. Even though I was never a good student, all the classes that I've taken since I've graduated college, including my master's degree, I have averaged a 4.0. Not bad for a 6th grade flunky. And I don't say that to impress you. I say that to impress upon you the fact that God can use you regardless of what has happened in your past, regardless of how many times you have failed. Use that to learn from. Learn that to fail forward, in the words of John Maxwell. And realize that failure is an event. It is not a person. You may have failed, but you are not a failure. I am not a failure. I have failed. I have failed plenty. But I am not a failure because I learned from my failure and I pick myself up and I continue on that path that God has set me on. The one thing that I want to emphasize to you, that the reason I share my story with you, is for you to understand that your past does not determine your future. My family and I have just recently watched the Back to the Future trilogy. And in the last movie, Doc Brown kept saying, "Your future has not yet been written." Your future has not yet been written. It's still a blank page. Regardless of what your past pages have said, your future has not been written. Go out, move forward, learn from your failure, and write your own future, because your past does not determine your future.